Welcome. I am so excited to be here with Dr. Jaiya John. How are you, Jaiya?
Hey, I'm beautiful today. Thank you for inviting and just being present with me as you
Oh,
wonderfully do with folks. Thank you.
thank you. I'm excited for this conversation about one of your books, Freedom. And you have many, many books, and we have been in dialogue about some of your work, but especially during this time as we think about one, celebrating authors and writers, and then also it being Black History Month. And so it's a critical time for us to have this conversation. And I love this book and want to encourage those who are watching to definitely get their copy of Freedom. And so thank you for being willing, one, to write it and share it, but then two, to discuss it on today.
Thank you very much. It's
Mhm.
my honor and pleasure, the birthing and just to be able to talk about it with you.
Yeah. Well, along with being a social psychologist and an author, your kind of central, I would say, identity and calling is freedom work and being a
Yeah.
freedom worker and rehumanizing. And so I want to start with I'm going to read this sentence on page 21, which says, freedom requires a way of life that allows you to be centered, still inside, balanced, and secure. And so, as we think about freedom and being centered, throughout the book, you juxtapose freedom to fear. So, can you talk some about that dynamic between fear and freedom?
Oh, wow, that's a beautiful question. Thank you. A beautiful request, really. So I will take us all the way back to my childhood and just share a story about, um, my coming of age in this calling, which for me, I am clear was sown into my being before conception and then marinated in the womb of my gestation, right? So that by the time of my birth, it was already very ripe and ready within me, this calling. And I say that not to say that as a newborn I was walking around the world preaching it, but that I was from the beginning sensitive to this worldly dynamic of oppression and freedom,
Mm,
this counter dynamic, this intimately woven tension between freedom and oppression. And I, I know this was with me actively from the beginning, um, because I have memories as a young child of beginning to learn about certain historical figures in the world, watching movies, especially some of the old school movies that would come on around Easter, right? And you remember those ones, the Ten Commandments, right? You and I, we remember that stuff, right? Some of these youngins, I don't know if they have a reference point, but those movies that were really telling biblical stories. They were telling stories of freedom and oppression. And I cannot recall any stories affecting me more deeply than those stories, whether it was stories about the human walk and ministry of Jesus or the life of Moses, the movement of the people, the Hebrew, the Israelite people from captivity to freedom,
mm,
the movement into the promised land, and all along with these stories, they just they just they they didn't just captivate me, they consumed me as though I was being poured into with the nectar of what would be my work in the world, right? And all I saw, to this day I can remember being, 3, 4, 5 years of age and just wide-eyed and seeing these dramas played out, and they were, even then I recognized, were stories about fear and freedom, because they would show over and over again. And this went on to include stories like that of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Che Guevara and revolutionaries around the world, Cesar Chavez, many of the women in Africa who were leading freedom movements that we don't learn about here in the United States purposefully, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, I was just given this awareness that the dynamic always hinged along that axis of fear and faith, or love, meaning there were two motives then, always, throughout our history and now, that drive us. And that one drive is fear and the other is love. Love for your children, your family, your community, yourself will cause you to really stick your neck out, to really risk some things, right? To really go there. If you have love for something, someone that you feel is in imminent danger, it will cause you to go to extraordinary lengths and to summon miraculous courage, really. However, when we become saturated with fear, we tend to go the opposite direction. We will run away from the fire, the flames, the danger, and we will almost co-sign on our captivity. You feel me?
That's
Yes.
right. That's right.
And so in this book,
Say that line one more time. Co-sign your activity.
yes, we will say, yes, master, yes, master. We will be affirming the master,
Yes.
and then we will, even to our own people,
Yes.
we will be saying, nah, man, don't stand up, don't rise up, don't speak up,
Right.
don't act up.
That's
We got and so this, you can find this throughout the world,
right.
where people are being oppressed in a genocidal fashion. We're not talking about, and you and I hope we can really highlight that, when this word freedom in many ways has been co-opted by folks who are beneficiaries of caste systems and oppression systems around the world. Not necessarily an intentional co-opting, but some people will take that concept of freedom to mean, oh, we're talking about my personal comfort, right? As an individual.
My freedom to oppress.
My freedom to oppress, my freedom to continue to consume and do conquest, and to exercise greed and control, my freedom to maintain my place in the caste system, my freedom to continue to perpetuate ways of life that are harming entire populations. And so any of us who do this work under whatever banner, whether that be anti-racism work or decolonial work or what have you, however you language it, it is imperative that we be very clear with that when we use certain language and wording and phrasing, we are referring to collective oppression, systemic, societal, power-backed oppression. We're not talking about two people getting in an argument in the parking lot outside of a grocery store, and then both people feeling like they should have the freedom to park their car wherever they want or anything. We're not talking about individual convenience. We're talking about historical, genocidal, dehumanization and destruction, which includes historically, for me, I've always felt like two of the most tenured and terrorizing and destructive forms of oppression that humanity has known have been man's oppression of women.
Yes.
Maybe that was the first oppression, actually. certainly we oppress children. Maybe that was the second oppression. Once the woman begat the child, now both are vulnerable to that ill spirit that rationalizes its right to oppress. And then, we can speak of race, and we can speak of nationality and religion, and et cetera, et cetera. All of these are rooted in the requirement that fear be stoked, be created, be flamed, be perpetuated and protected. Without fear, it is impossible to control a people. And so
Yeah,
it's a fundamental instrument.
right. I think both uh, keeping oppressed people afraid, but then another piece that you reveal is that the oppressor is also living in fear. And I think
Yes.
the first things you name is superiority being baked in with insecurity,
Yes, thank you.
right?
Thank you for,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for seeing that. Yeah, the book really opens with sort of an introduction, like a theatrical, a dramatic introduction into these two characters, you know, supremacy and inferiority, which I view as existing as viruses. Supremacy and inferiority are really part of the same organism, energetic, spiritual organism, of unwellness that has been pandemic and endemic since our beginning as human beings. It's one of those pandemics that we've never reckoned with in any kind of real way. Um, People sometimes think of supremacy as a spirit of arrogance. And while it may be that, it is fundamentally at its root a spirit of fear. It's terrified. It's terrified because it doesn't have a soulful spiritual grounding in this world. It depends entirely on conquest and control and unjust power. It depends on manipulation. It depends on illusion and fallacy. It depends on the threat of harm to the oppressed, that if you rise up against this social order, you will be harmed. And we know very well the forms of violence that are utilized by oppression, by caste systems in order to keep people, quote, in their place.
Mm-hmm.
So supremacy and
Yeah,
inferiority.
yeah,
Um,
are the key pieces.
and to unveil supremacy further, we can say that a human being consumed or overtaken with the supremacy virus performs being superior, but deep down feels inferior.
Yes, I
A
like the
healthy,
performance.
yes, a healthy living thing in the world, whether human, plant, animal, mineral, a healthy living thing feels neither superior or inferior. It is at peace with its wholeness. It is conscious of its wholeness, of its purpose, of its duty within the collective web of life. And so it is not driven by that lust fire of fear or that terror sky of inferiority. And we don't talk really often in this country about these essential elements at the root level. We tend to talk on a surface, superficial level about, whether it be racism, sexism, et cetera, et cetera. We have a hard time getting down into the dirt of the root of this. Why is it so uh, difficult to extinguish something so foul, so flammable, so utterly destructive of life as we know it? And there are psychological, you and I both being trained in psychology, we know that there's a deep psychology of fear involved in human trauma. And fear is a very effective form of chain, shackle, and cage. And people become very skillful at utilizing something like fear.
Yeah, yes. And when we think about the different tools and strategies that are being used, you named one of them, which was the intentional miseducation, not wanting people to know who they are. And
Yeah.
an impact of that, which you address, is, what we would call internalized racism or internalized oppression, or you talk about as self-hatred. And so I wonder if you can, on page 9, about midway through that top paragraph, it starts with "we run," and maybe just to the end of that paragraph.
Top of page 9.
Uh-huh, about midway through page 9, that first paragraph,
Mm,
and it says "we run."
yes.
Okay.
And just read to the end of the
Yes.
paragraph.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thema read the book.
I'm here. Yes.
Yeah. We run from our heritage,
Mhm.
our history, our ancestors, our
Mhm.
traditions and customs and rituals and ways. We run from our language and values. We
Mhm.
run from our own natural bodies,
Mhm.
hair, and expression. We run from abundance and joy, from love and kindness, from anything soft and nurturing. We belong, at least we think we do,
Mhm.
to hard days and hard ways. Thus, we will live in this pain forever.
Mm. So powerful. And we see that happening. One of the pieces for me growing up in a predominantly Black community, predominantly Black school, was people being teased for having dark complexion or African features, or African immigrants who come here and are ridiculed. And this whole hierarchy and internalized oppression. So can you speak some to the cost of that and how you see that playing out, us running from ourselves?
Thank you. I can speak very intimately to the cost because I was that child.
Yeah.
By circumstance, growing up, I grew up in indigenous land in New Mexico, and in an area where, of course, no one looked like me. No one had my features. It was pretty much, my brother Greg and myself. It felt that way psychologically, right? That it's like, wow, we're the only ones here on the planet. And
Mm,
so when you begin as a child to absorb then the messaging from society at large,
mhm,
that seeps like a sneaking substance into every area of life. It shows up in your school experience, in the
mhm,
books that you are allowed to read and exposed to. It shows up in the books you're not allowed to read, that you're not exposed to. It shows up in the conversation on the street and in the community about what people are like this and what people are like that. It shows up in the psychological attribution of why people are in the place they are in socially, in terms of their caste, in terms of their social class, um, and their circumstance. And you begin to soak up all of that messaging and then examine yourself, and you start to weave false stories about being less than, other than, about not belonging, about being inferior, about having um, monstrous appearance and features and hair. And I was that child deeply. I was that child in a painful way. It became a conflagration of self-hatred, where I would literally try to find ways to erase the African
mm,
appearance of my ancestral body.
mm,
And when I write in a book like this about that relationship with our ancestors, I write it from a very personal place of understanding the cost to losing ourselves, to losing our generational ancestral um, supply of love
mhm,
when we live in a world and a society that does not love us, and more to the point, despises and fears us and has a lust for murdering us. If you do not have that rootedness that is certainly a spiritual ancestral lifeline, you begin to self-mutilate. You begin to hate your hair to such a degree that you do anything to get rid of it and appear otherwise. You begin to despise your features to a degree where you would do anything to rid yourself of those features, and then certainly of skin tone. And then, as we know, within our own people, this then turns into hatred of one another. It turns into this, whether it's the colorism, and you see us going at each other in harmful, hurtful ways about skin tone. We go at each other around our hair, and natural versus this and this and that, features. We do it all, and all that is the oppressor has downloaded into us through social means over generations a recipe or a program for self-destruction, the Willie Lynch phenomenon, right? And so it's a very effective thing. You don't need to have an overseer on the plantation if the people are overseeing themselves. We're not required to have the KKK riding in hoods if we're hating on each other in our own hoods, if we are raising our children to disbelieve in themselves. Now, one of the fallacies when it comes to us as an African people is the idea that we collectively are guilty of violence against the self. Now, that is a media perpetuated narrative, again, coming from the oppressor class. In truth, it is only because of how deeply we love each other and care for each other and nurture each other that we have survived these 500 years, that we survived the Middle Passage, that we survived the trading block, that we survived the lynchings and the stonings and the chainings and the cagings, that we survived the rape and the dislocation and the breaking up of our families. We have survived via a profound love for ourselves. Yet what we are saying is that we are also burdened with a very real bruise, a lasting bruise of self-rejection. And that as an African people around the world, not just in the United States, we wrestle with every moment of our existence.
I'm so appreciative that you raise both that internalized conflict and also the love, which takes me to the next quote I want you to read.
All right, let's
On
go, let's
page
go.
183.
183.
And if you can start at "if in your revolution" and end with "collective love."
Thank you. I will.
Thank
And I
you.
should say, I should share quickly for the listening audience. This book I see as a pouring that it came from a spiritual place and also from a place of intellectual, academic, knowledge harvesting, because that was my path as a doctor of social psychology. The focus was on intergroup and race relations, on identity development as it pertains to oppression dynamics. And so what I wanted to do is have this book be medicine. So I hope and pray that it exists as a spiritual medicine, and yet it also carries that for those folks who are, who geek out on the academic understanding of why we treat each other like this. Hopefully this book holds plenty of that.
Yes.
That as well.
It feeds the mind for us to be able to understand what's happening, and then provides the medicine for our healing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you'd like me to start with "if in your revolution"?
Yes, and go down to the next.
Okay. And so if in your revolution, your personal collective revolution, you are unsure which way to go, love is always the way to go. Let that impossible illumination be your North Star. Self-hatred is an overlooked aspect of a revolution.
Mm.
You are asking people to act in love for their people when not only do some of them not love their people, they do not love themselves.
Right. That right there.
Hey, revolution depends on creating climates and incentives for people to heal into a new way of seeing and feeling about themselves so they can be ground for collective love.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Hey.
such the healing piece, loving ourselves and being able to love each other despite all of these messages, as you're saying, of fear and of self-hatred. So that piece, since you shared some about your personal journey, talk some about how love was important in the shifting and the
Oh
healing.
yeah, thank you, thank you. I was hoping you would ask.
Yeah.
Because that's an important narrative, not just my personal one, but my personal journey, as it is a reflection of our collective journey, which is true for each of us. And the self mutilation, I mean that in a literal sense. I mean that in a metaphorical sense. I mean it in every way. I was becoming a master of self-mutilation, self-rejection, self-harm. Um, there was this thing, and I think it's actually pretty common, but one of the things I did when I was young was I falsified my voice. There are well-known human beings among us, Black folk, who've come and gone, who actually were afflicted with the same. And it's a tactic, it's a survival tactic, a trauma tactic, but where I was as a boy, when you're a baby or a young child, society tends to view you like a teddy bear, even if you're of the wrong class of people. But when you start to move toward and into puberty and your body changes and you grow taller and your shoulders broaden, I'm speaking of boys now, and your voice changes, and you are surrounded by people who have been infected with that supremacy virus, so they fear and are threatened by you becoming an adult version of that class of people. You have a way of, we're very sensitive and intuitive and aware, and so we begin to say to ourselves, well, I need to accommodate the way they expect me to be so that they are more comfortable with me, so that I can be okay, so that I can be safe, so that I can be safe walking on the street to school. I can be safe at school in the hallways, safe in the classroom, safe with the teachers, safe with the students, safe in the community, safe with my teammates in sports, safe with my friends. One of the things I did was to lift my voice because I began to intuit and notice that people were uncomfortable with my natural voice. And I did this for so long without realizing I was doing it. And so for me, part of the revolutionary act was to say, I'm reclaiming my voice. I'm
Claim
speaking
voice.
as I
Yeah.
speak, because I was given this voice by Creator as an instrument in my purpose and my calling. Okay. And the same is true for all aspects of our physical traits. Our physical traits are not meaningless. And so the hair we have been given has meaning. It carries power and force. It does incredible things, right? Our features have meaning. Our bodies have meaning. It's this that we need to remember and relearn to associate our physical self with sacredness
Yeah.
and purpose, right? And so you asked about love and its role in my healing journey. It was once I left at 17 out into the world, I began to encounter, and I know I was brought into these encounters, people who loved me for my Blackness, people who loved me with my Blackness. So there was not this feeling of being pressured to depart from that part of myself and put it in a closet, hide it under a bed, tamp it down, moderate it, mediate it, diminish it. Nikki Giovanni, the poet, blessed me at age 18 because she came to my college and she showed me what it meant to love yourself entirely as an African person. Muhammad Ali was another ancestor, which Nikki's a living ancestor. Muhammad has changed to light, but he was another ancestor who, when I was a young boy trying to become a man, he showed me what it meant to be free as a Black man. And so I began to have these encounters from a distance through our culture, but then also in my actual life. Joe the barber, here I am as I'm still a teenager, just a kid, and this is my opportunity to be around people who were comfortable with my Blackness. And just the fact that he was comfortable with me was healing. And then he began to show me that he loved me as a human being, right? So it's not that he was sitting there talking blackety, blackety, black. It was that he was just loving me as a human being, even though my Blackness was out, because he was doing my hair. So it was literally out, right? And he's working it. And I felt like, wow, he loves my hair. He's not uncomfortable with my hair. He's asking me about my life and my day. Does this mean that I'm worthy of being loved? What? I began to ask the question for the first time after almost 2 decades on earth. That is a reflection of the sickness of a society that dehumanizes a people to such a degree that we can go decades without ever feeling that we are worthy of love, worthy of loving, worthy of having beautiful joy and beautiful peace and having safe spaces.
Yes.
And so love is not a Hallmark card. Love is a life raft in the middle of an ocean of oppression. Love is a fire in the darkest night that keeps us warm and away from fright. Love is a sacrament. It's a sanctuary. It's a solemn song. Love is a deep thing. It's an intense requirement. It is unconditional. It says you must love yourself regardless of how imperfect you are, how many mistakes you've made. You must love your people, no matter how challenged your people may be and traumatized your people may be. You must love yourself enough to bear this freedom fire that would cause you to risk things, to have a courage and a fortitude to speak up and speak out. Love is our compatriot in any revolution. In Haiti, love was there. In West Africa, love was there. In Jamaica, love was there. In Canada, in Alaska, wherever we have been straining to be free, love was there.
Yes. And can I say, in the middle of that answer, did you just give us a spontaneous poem?
I can't help it. I can't help it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Craft. Yes, yes, indeed. And I so appreciate the simplicity of the story of the barber, of what it can be when we take the time to really see people, right? To really accept and embrace. I know you have such a heart, especially for doing this for children, because of the cost, of being rendered invisible or unacceptable, right? And so without it needing to be some big, grand intervention, but presence, right? So the sacred presence is the healing.
Oh, you got it. You got it. So let us move deeper into that soil, because that's beautiful to me. I think that's vital. First of all, that we recognize that healing ourselves can be, ought to be, need to be an organic process, not a performative one, not a grand dramatic one, but simply being present, as you said, learning to be present within the self. And so I had to learn stillness and centeredness as a young person. I said, I don't want this pain any longer. I want peace. What do I need for peace? I need to learn to be still, because oppressors want you to exist in a state of fight or flight, in a state of chaos, in a state of adrenaline and cortisol, in a state of acidic um, self immolation, right? And so it is so vital that we just learn in mundane ways to be still, to be calm, so that the gift of our higher creative self can come alive. We can problem solve and conflict resolve. We can be visionaries and think ahead, because we're not trying to just survive the next moment. We're not looking for the next danger lurking around the corner. We have learned to just come back to ourselves, come home to stillness and peace, which is our optimal design. It's where we become miracle workers, actually. If you think of the historical figures who have performed actual miracles, don't you recognize the stillness that emanated from those souls?
Yes.
They were not scattered, they were not frantic, they were not rushed, they were not full of anxiety, depression, despair. They had, by practice, and I feel like this is vital, they didn't just magically become still. They were determined to be still, and then they worked at stillness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
from the young man from Nazareth all the way up to now with Thich Nhat Hanh, our Vietnamese brother, who spent his life saying, I want to heal myself back to calmness and stillness. And by doing so, he became medicine for the world.
Yeah.
He became
Yeah.
medicine. And
That's
so
so
it's
key. Mm-hmm.
organic. It's organic. What are you doing as you move through the moments of your day to be kind to yourself, to be gentle, to breathe, to remember? And then that becomes infectious and becomes a new pandemic.
Right. And that is the clarity of our worth, as opposed to, so when you say freedom, some people immediately think freedom to do, freedom to hustle, freedom to grind, but know that calling of freedom to be still and know you're already enough. You're already enough.
Yes, and so thank you again. You are speaking of something so priceless, for us to understand collectively, that so much of freedom is about what we release,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, that's good.
Because, you are asking about cost. What does it cost a family when the parents are so enslaved to fear and trauma that they are not able to be present for their children in a loving way, an attentive way, to notice what their children are going through, to sit and have conversations, to listen, to affirm and encourage, to nurture and praise and raise? I don't mean raise as in, yeah, took you from birth to 18. I mean raise as in lift you up. I mean, higher and higher, to
Yeah.
behold, there is nothing greater than you but this creation. And so we do need to spend time reflecting on the cost. There is a physical cost. Our lives are shorter. We have a shorter lifespan. We have poor health, physical health. We have cost in terms of economic fruitfulness. We have cost in terms of our relationships. And I don't just mean intimate romantic relationships. I mean the cost between generations when we are not well, the cost between friends, community members, the cost between our different individuals and entities that are doing the sacred work, of healing, but we have not gotten to a place where we're able to correlate in a healthy way. And so we sort of compete with each other, because the oppressing climate has taught us that life is competition in a toxic way. In a toxic way. You are to treat everybody that is not part of your group as hostile and enemy. And so here you have in philanthropic endeavors, you have people going at each other, and it's the saddest of things, because they are all working really for the same common cause. So the cost is enormous. The cost is virtually infinite, and the remedy is imminently available to us. We don't require some sort of external intervention or massive infusion. It's just the organic, intimate ways in which we treat ourselves and one another.
Mm-hmm.
which is within us. It's in our cells and molecules. We just have to revive that
Mm-hmm.
spirit. Yeah,
Yeah, so that call into the stillness, I
yeah.
want to take us to page 97.
97.
Yes. And if you can start with rest feeds and just go to rest, just that middle section.
That's a beautiful transition you just did there. Okay.
Yeah.
So I will do that. So read through to what point?
Rest. So just that middle quote.
Okay, just
Rest,
read the quote.
rest to rest. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this quote is leading off this section of the book titled Rest Feeds Your Revolution. Speaking to the how vital it is that we care for ourselves in that kind of way. So the verse is this: every single thing in your life heals and blooms when you rest. Yes,
Ah, which is such medicine for our people because when you look around, it's not a lot of rest, is what you said before, is, this hard, hustle, this constant warfare, this survival mode. And
yes.
so the call into rest, speak to that.
Thank you. I will. I would love to. Our conditioned mind is almost hostile
Mm,
to anyone suggesting that we should rest.
yeah.
And so you get blowback, you get comments like,
Mm,
that's easy for you to say, or it's
right.
nice in theory, or you therapists, you healers, you're always talking about rest.
Mhm.
There's a beautiful work being done through the NAP ministry that
Yeah.
I came across through the Instagram space,
Yeah.
and she's doing such a wonderful labor
Mm,
for us all in helping to uncondition and recondition us in relationship to this concept of rest. And so
mhm.
the pushback, it exists because we were conditioned into this. You have to understand that if we're speaking of us as a people specifically, you know, generations of literally being whipped into the mentality that I cannot rest. If I rest, I die. If I rest out here in this cotton field, I die. If I rest out here in this sugarcane field, my loved ones die. My children die. My lover dies. My parents die. We die.
Mm,
We die. We die. This repetition became embedded in our cellular being. It became passed down through generations. Saturday morning, 6 a.m.,
mm,
parent breaking through the door. You kids get up. We got work to do. You ain't going to be lazy today. Cracking the whip, cracking the whip. Why do we as an African people have that expression, cracking the whip? That doesn't come from a comic book or, Fat Albert on Saturdays. Cracking the whip comes from our lived experience. The whip was cracked on us. And so when you become trained and
mm,
conditioned to believe deeply that if you rest, you will die, it has a way of moving from 1619 into 2022. And all of a sudden, here we are saying, I can't rest. I got bills to pay. I got a job. I got 3 jobs. Like my children to raise. This one's going to college in a couple of years.
mhm,
I got bills. I'm stressed.
mhm,
My boss is going to fire me. Someone's going to be displeased with me. If I rest, someone's going to think I'm lazy.
mhm,
Women in particular struggle with
mhm,
this sense of I have to constantly be doing, or people are going to think I'm not a good person. I'm not a good woman. I'm not a good mother. It's deep and it is toxic and it is so hurtful to us biologically, spiritually, emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally. We were created and designed to rest as foundation and soil for our fruitfulness, abundance, not productivity,
mhm,
fruitfulness, which is different than productivity. You can drive someone to be productive for 20 years and then they die of a heart attack or stroke. Fruitfulness is a condition that exists in this divine balance point between getting things done
mhm,
and taking care of myself so that I can continue to get things done. Fruitfulness is an orchard where the trees keep producing manna from heaven over decades and decades because we are caring for the orchard and its roots, right?
Yeah.
So we need to speak of fruitfulness. Um, Rest is not necessarily going to bed and sleeping. Another part of rest we need to illuminate is that rest can occur, again, if we learn how to breathe and be calm and still. That's restfulness. You can move through a very full day in a restful condition. In a rest. And what I see, and it pains my heart, I see this mostly in women, people who I love. I see them moving through their day, very full plates. Yes. That part, they have a certain degree of control over, a certain degree they cannot control. The day is full, and the next day will be full, and the next day will be full. The part that breaks my heart is when I see them moving through that in a state or condition of stress and anxiety, like a trauma level, like full out, alarms blaring, muscles tense, breathing short and rapidly. Fire, 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 fire. I gotta go to the grocery store. Fire, fire, fire. I gotta go to work. Fire, fire. I gotta get the kids dressed. Fire, fire. And the poor being is burning out as we speak. And so what can we do? We can practice restfulness, even in the midst of our current reality. So we cannot use busyness as an excuse any longer if we wish to be free.
Oh, say that again. We cannot use busyness any longer as an excuse if we choose to be free.
If we choose to be free, we need to fire that excuse. We need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
divorce that excuse. We need to release
yeah.
it.
And that's so important because, as you said, many people will say, well, if I was rich, I would rest, right? If I had a million
Yeah,
people helping me, I would rest.
right.
But it's a way of being, right? A way of even approaching the day, a way that we think about ourselves and seeing ourselves, as you would say, sacredly, which is why I have one more request.
Yes.
Okay.
I love the requests. These are
Okay.
yeah.
Page 211.
211.
And this one is a little bit longer, but I'm just going to say start with don't be afraid and stop when spirit says stop.
I like that. Say when spirit says stop. Okay. Hmm. Don't be afraid to treat yourself sacredly. If you haven't always treated yourself so well, it can feel strange, uncomfortable, even vulnerable to treat yourself sacredly, as though you don't deserve it, as though it won't and shouldn't last, especially if the people in your life don't treat themselves sacredly or didn't treat you sacredly while you were growing up. Breathe peace now, dear one. Even small, bashful steps will get you to a sacred life. Sacredness is a habit. In a world that pollutes, cheapens, and desecrates the sacred, it is up to you to champion, celebrate, and role model living sacredly. Don't be afraid to believe you are a sacred thing. Don't be afraid to call yourself sacred. See what miracles happen when a sacred thing exists as a sacred thing. You have so many soul rises left in your life, and you are ever worthy of beautiful things. What are your sacred ways? Naming them brings them to life.
Yes, yes, yes. Name that we can be afraid to even treat ourselves well. right? Of what will that mean or what will fall apart if I dare to see myself as sacred, or who will say I have no right to do that, or who do I think I am, right? So to push past that, and as you said, even when it feels uncomfortable, because that's one of the things I see, especially in clinical care and in practice, that often we have adjusted to dysfunction. And so shifting does feel uncomfortable or feel like you're doing something wrong, but needing to make that shift.
Thank you. It's true. We struggle with those kinds of changes because we have calcified our identity to accommodate what was expected of us. Yeah. People pleasing is part of that whole dynamic. And it's popular to talk about people pleasing and things of that nature these days. We don't seem to talk very much about how can we go about making that change or shift, in a clinical sense. um, People need to go on a very real journey,
Mhm,
um, even if it's a small change that they're making
mhm,
in their way of being, in their way of living. And I always come back to this very unsexy truth that we make personal change happen by practice. That's it.
mhm.
Repetition
Yeah.
times resistance equals change. That is true in the gym when we're lifting weights. It's true on the court when we're shooting hoops.
Yeah.
It's true at the piano when you're strumming the keys. It's true when we learn to become better parents as our children grow and grow and grow. Repetition times resistance equals change.
Mhm,
Repetition is simply that, I'm going to practice giving myself 5 more minutes of sleep and really being asleep. I'm going to practice breathing with my whole body instead of just my chest. I'm going to practice not criticizing myself. And then resistance is what happens when you practice things that you are habituated to and have normalized. That's the resistance. It doesn't feel easy, it feels hard.
yeah.
And so if we can be willing to say, just like we do at the beginning of a new year, we say, "Oh, I'm gonna. These are my. What do we call them?
Resolutions.
Resolutions,
Right,
right?" And people love to
right.
set resolutions around certain things.
Mm, mm,
Now, when it comes to learning how to be free
mm, mm.
from self-imposed slavery,
Ah,
we have a challenge with that one because we don't have faith. We don't believe in us. We say my identity is that this is the way I've always been. This is how I've been with people. Uh, this is how I learned to be a good girl. This is how I learned to be a good boy, a good child. I learned to make people happy when they wanted me to be a certain way. The teacher said, "Don't talk." My parents said, "Stop moving around." My older brother said, "Stop acting goofy." My friend said, you know, "That's weird that you journal." So I stopped journaling. I learned to make people happy
mhm,
by doing what they wanted of me. And now I'm 48, 68, and I want to change because I'm in pain, but I'm scared. Well, we douse the fear flame with the water of practice, small incremental steps.
mhm,
Today, I'm not going to do that because that doesn't feel good to me. I'm
mhm,
going to do this. And if I fail to do it tomorrow, I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm just going to get back on that ride
mhm.
and practice the next day. We are malleable. We were designed to change, but psychologically, we're terrified of change. So it's our identity that needs to evolve.
Mm,
And identity can evolve if we are consciously working on it. I've always thought of myself this way. Okay, but do I have to continue to think of myself this way? Can I have a new vision for myself?
mm,
And you know what
mhm.
gives birth to new visions? Deep, beautiful breathing, stillness, calmness, that moment where we become a vessel or a chalice, a breezeway for new wind to come through.
Mm,
Because it's
mhm.
always waiting and available to come through us to say, whoosh, you can be this too.
Right.
You can be this too.
Yeah, open to that fresh wind.
Yeah.
And I am just so grateful and excited for this conversation. I want you all to get freedom. And I would like to ask you to say, as you were writing or channeling or receiving this word, who is this for? Like, if someone's listening, how will they know if this book is for them?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you. So it's easy of us to say that this book is for every soul because we each have a duty in this world, um, to be a part of creating a reality in which all souls are free. More particularly, though, this book is, although it certainly feeds people on a very, very personal level, I hope, you know,
Yeah.
my deeper prayer is that it nourishes us to participate more fully in our own personal contribution to collective freedom in overcoming the forces and the systems of oppression in the world. And so, in part, that has to do with our identity. You know, how do I see myself? And what does that seeing determine about the way in which I relate to this world? And in part, this freedom journey is also about simply what is my duty, given the life space that I occupy, given the blessings in my life, whether that be just to be alive. I'm alive today and I have health. So, what is my opportunity to contribute to dismantling, really incinerating these systems of oppression, these caste systems? What is my duty? And this book speaks, I hope, to the pathway that we can take, each of us, to grow more comfortable in playing a role in this era on earth where we learn and relearn to be human again, and beyond being human, where we learn and remember how to be a living thing
Yeah.
amongst all living things, a
Yeah.
safe space.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Well, I hope you all will get the book and also go to follow Jaiya John on Instagram and Twitter, to go to his website, jayajohn.com, and that will also connect you to the wonderful podcast where you can hear him read more. And I'm just going to ask you to finish this phrase in whatever way comes. I knew I was free when.
Oh, I love that. I knew I was free when I began to consistently be kind to myself and allowed my loving heart to do its loving thing publicly without shame, without self consciousness. When I let love flow like a river, I was free.
Yes, yes. And we can tell. And
Ah,
we benefit from your freedom. So thank you, Jaya.
thank you, Tama.